1 in 50 Australians living have been to prison. That's 500,000 Australians. 1 in 6 of our First Nations brothers and sisters living have been to prison. That's 120,000 First Nations and brothers from a population of more than 720,000. So the impact that incarceration can have is referential. It is defining. It goes to one's form and content. And leaving prison worse than what you went in is something that we should resolve ourselves away from and build a type of resilience in people that improves them. One's primary health goes to their mental well-being. And people leaving prison with substandard health care, with ailments worse than what they went in, with conditions born of the prison experience, that invalidates them in terms of their sense of self and goes to their psychosocial self, to their sense of self-worth and to how others perceive them. And you often talk about prejudice.
That is true. There is a large amount of prejudice placed upon those who are presently incarcerated, and prison needs to become a place of the rehabilitative and the restorative instead of a place of punitive behaviour. We do need to have a societal shift in how we look at those who are incarcerated, and we need to focus on what we can do to help these individuals rather than to further punish, alienate and perpetuate a cycle of disadvantage and repetitious behaviours.
You've now experienced both juvenile detention and worked with people leaving juvenile detention with very weak safety nets, and some of them with no safety nets at all. And you've also experienced people on the inside. You've worked with more than 1,000. You've worked with hundreds of long-term cases of individuals in our prisons. And leaving aside the outliers, more thematic type of cases, what are some of those ones that stand out to you that you can tell the audience?
One case I do think about regularly is a man, maybe 30 years old, that we met in the medical unit in one of the prisons, and he had been there for weeks. He was on his hands and knees. He was crying and pleading for help and for medical care, which he did not receive. The only medical support provided to him was paracetamol, some painkillers, and it turns out this individual had extreme nerve pain running from his jaw up into his brain. He'd had teeth removed and he was just at the mercy of absolute pain and was unable to do anything other than just lie on the floor and beg and scream for help.
Yeah, I remember he broke our hearts when he was on his knees, begging us for help and assistance, and we were actually shocked that he'd been, well, not shocked because it's not an outlier, it's actually thematic, as we often say, and yeah, begging for help for his basic human right, his basic healthcare rights that are denied in our prisons, sadly, and most Australians would find this unimaginable. They'd be shocked. But if Medicare, the PBS and the NDIS, specifically Medicare in this instance, were to be rolled out to prisoners nationwide, this situation would never have occurred. This young man would not have been alone on his hands and knees begging for weeks in a concrete cell. It just would not have happened, and it should not happen. Also, the other matter, there was no infirmary in the prison, and every prison should have an infirmary. They should have a GP, as you often argue, a GP in every prison, a general practitioner, a bulk billing general practitioner, which would make it then, you know, affordable for prisons if we go down that line of cost effect. So, sadly, when humanity is brought to its knees and seeing this individual on his knees, we got a same-day outcome. We got the access to the healthcare that should have been had weeks before, and he was relieved of that. We saw him a couple of weeks later, and we hadn't seen him since he got that same-day assistance, and he was ever so grateful, ever so grateful. But we take for granted the healthcare that's universal for us in this country, for those who are citizens of this country, because let us also remind that people who aren't citizens of this country
are not necessarily able to access Medicare. But for those who are citizens, and the incarcerated are citizens, their Medicare, PBS, Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, and NDIS effectively stop at the gate once they're incarcerated. And the presumption that they are immediately reconnected with Medicare, Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, and the NDIS leaving prison, that's also a little bit of a myth that we have to bust. The fact is that there has to be some work to transition them back, to connect them with this basic right that we take for granted, Medicare.
For the thousands of adults and children presently incarcerated, oftentimes it can take so long until you're able to see a medical professional that the situation has escalated well past the point of required intervention and preventive intervention. An individual, I recall, unknowingly had cancer for 9 to 10 months before he was able to see a GP. It took a lot for him to finally be able to see a practitioner who was able to inform him that he had cancer and begin treatment. It took 9 months of compounding symptoms to escalate to the point of an absolute unbearable existence for this individual to finally receive medical intervention.
That's sad.
It's past the point. It's to the point now where this could have been preventable or at least partially subdued.
And his cancer advanced to a stage that it shouldn't have had before treatment. Well, he was available to treatment, and now his future health prospects are being diminished by what should have been actually available to him with an earlier intervention that he would have had in wider community outside the prison experience, because he would have had access to the specialists that he's denied, in fact, in prison. That's what we've actually all got to do as people in whatever layer of the primary, secondary and allied health spaces, and all mental health professionals and advocates need to actually urge for the addressing of this inequality. And it's not just health inequality, it's actually what you say, Connie, deprivation of the very rudimentary care and provision of that care.
It is imperative for not only the individuated circumstances, but also the wider societal impacts of knowing that your son, your sister, your brother, your father is incarcerated, already isolated, ostracised from family, and also being denied these basic human rights. So we do urge for the implementation of Medicare, the PBS and the NDIS into all prison systems nationwide.
And you've experienced people living juvenile detention, kids from 10 years of age to 17, 18 years of age, children, teenagers. And to think that this actually happens also in juvenile detention and correction facilities with children and kids' prisons, it's Dickensian. It's a Dickensian tale. It sounds like the poorhouses of the 19th century, but it's a reality. It's a reality, and you've worked actually with young people living in prison, and had to actually apply to get them a healthcare card, to reconnect them with Medicare, to avail them to the supports. That the fact that they're not even supported in transition, that's a reality, isn't it? It's not an outlier, it's thematic.
Mm-hmm. The campaign to implement Medicare, PBS and the NDIS is ever more so important when we're talking about our incarcerated children. When we consider that the age of criminal responsibility is 10 years old, it's just inexcusable, and we need to look after our children and break this cycle which will eventuate in them landing in adult prisons. So
64% of children incarcerated will go on to adult prison, 64%. And that's an abomination, a moral abomination, and we should be, at the very least, the age of responsibility in terms of the raising the age argument should be from 14, and we should have other systems in place, community-based resource facilities, assertive outreach, all of that to go into the homes and support families, and where there is a need to actually look after someone, Then have the psychosocial community-based resource facilities to actually support them within these facilities in a restorative, humanistic, compassionate way. And these facilities be fully resourced. It's also not about just raising the age to 14, but also making sure that there are systems in place, safety nets, and we have to have as a society that responsibility. Yeah, and in terms of juvenile detention, if it's for those who are 15 years of age to 18, if the age is actually raised to 14, then these places have to have an equivalency of services on the inside, as you argue, we have on the outside, that no one should be living in any form of inequality. Social care systems, health, all of it. We should be, if someone's going to go inside into a prison, they should be coming out the better for it, not the worse.
We have an excerpt from an Al Jazeera documentary depicting the lives of two young boys that needed an investiture of faith and needed that psychosocial support. We've worked with both of them, and now you can hear their voices.
It's time now to rise!
This 13-year-old boy, who we'll call Adam, has already been to Western Australia's only youth prison, Banksia Hill Detention Centre.
When I first went there, I tried to act tough, because I thought it was like real jail, like proper men's jail.
He was first incarcerated last year and has already served 12 short sentences for petty offences.
You hear keys all the time. All you hear is keys and doors opening, doors shutting. So you can basically hear at night and through the day. Just hear keys, keys and keys, just shaking and shaking. It gets through your head.
You said some of the kids were like 10 and 11 and you were 12. Were all the kids treated fairly in there?
No, not really.
What things did you see that you think a kid shouldn't be subjected to?
Like 10-year-olds getting bashed from 16-year-olds. Yeah, that's weird.
You saw that happen?
Yeah. If you act like you're trying to act like a big rough person and you think you can stand over everyone, you're gonna get bashed or mobbed in there. But if you act like just a quiet person, you don't do nothing, yeah, you won't get picked on nothing, they'll just leave you alone.
Adam grew up in a country town in the care of his grandmother. His parents were heavy drug users who both killed themselves by the time he was 10. Soon after, Adam began smoking marijuana and sniffing petrol.
Why did you take drugs from such a young age?
I don't know, because everyone was saying my mum and dad, they died from taking drugs. So I just thought, well, if they died from taking drugs, and I'm never gonna see them again, so why don't I just just take drugs, see if I'll die.
This pain led him to spiral out of control down a path of homelessness and petty theft.
It was with my mates, just mates. No family, just mates. I was hungry. Yeah, my nan, she didn't let me back to her house. Kept telling me to just go. So yeah, I just do what my mates are doing to get feed. Yeah, started stealing. Just stole cars and broke into houses.
Since being released from youth detention, Adam has returned to school, and authorities placed him in the custody of his 18-year-old brother, who we'll call Michael. Estranged for much of their childhoods, both boys have spent most of their lives in Banksia Hill or on the streets.
Had nothing. Been down to that point where I had to steal off a homeless person myself. I was homeless, I was stealing off other homeless people. Just for whatever was in their bag. I got myself locked up. I just went and smashed the window and then sat and waited for the police to come. I got locked up so I could go get a bed and feed, because yeah, it was pretty cold out in the city.
So in a weird way, Banksia was a place in some ways of safety because you had nothing?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes when there's nothing and you got nothing, it was like I go there for a feed. I deliberately get myself arrested just so I can go and eat and have a shower, get like proper socks because my feet was hurting in the same socks for a while.
Michael was 14 when he first entered Banksia Hill Detention Centre.
Does it teach anyone a lesson?
No, it doesn't really help. It just puts you behind and then they just expect you to sit there till the time's up and then you come out and you're supposed to be a better person. But it's not like that. That's like, yeah, it's just bad. They're good to know where people are coming from, what they're doing it for, but they don't do that. They just see that you've done wrong and they chuck you in Banksia. You messed up, you go behind bars.
If you want parry, we got whole boxes of it or whatever.
Gerry and Megan are trying to help the boys find their feet, providing them with food and housing. They say their story shows how the system is failing young Indigenous inmates.
What have been their crimes? Homelessness. They've lost their parents, they're orphans. So now we're jailing children who are orphans, who are homeless, and who are stealing to survive, who have nowhere to go. Where is child protection for them? Where is the system there for them? Where is our government there for them? What court could think in its right mind that it should be jailing 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds? What were their crimes?
For now, the hope is that the boys are getting their lives back on track. Michael dreams of one day becoming a mechanic, but right now his hands are full just looking after Adam.
I'm still trying to figure out how to look after myself properly and like my mental health. And I've got to try to do that with my little brother as well. And it's like, I got to try to get myself into stuff and do stuff good with myself, like, as well as do it with him.
What do you think of this life?
I hate it. I hate it. Actually, you can go back just around the age of 8 or something and just start again from there. But just nah, it's not a good life to live.